I'll be speaking on body composition assessment in clinical practice today. And let me put it in the slideshow mode. Okay. So I'll be basically covering this topic by answering these following questions. What is body composition? Why we should measure this body composition? How to measure it? And what are the body composition norms? So, to understand the concept of body composition, there are various models, and this figure shows those models which are in common use. And based upon these conceptual models, we have various body assessment methods. The simplest of which is the two compartment model, which divides our total body mass into fat free mass and the fat mass. So, it's a very simple model. Here, the fat free mass will contain everything else besides fat, which will be organs, skeletal muscles, tissues, water, and everything. Most of our body composition assessment methods, which are widely available in use, are based upon two compartment model only, including your skin folds, the air displacement plethysmography, the BIA. Then we have the three compartment model, where it further refines the fat free mass into the lean mass and the bone, and the fat mass remains the same. So here the lean mass now will contain skeletal muscle mass, organs, water, and everything, whereas it has separated out the bone out of it. So this three compartment model, the DEXA scan, which has been used for body assessment, is basically based upon these three model of the body composition, three compartment model. Then we have the four compartment model, which further divides its lean mass into protein and the water, where uh, indicates protein indicates the skeletal muscle mass, whereas the water indicates the non-skeletal muscles and other tissues. Now, higher we go to the divide this body composition into the various compartments, the more accurate we become. So more we are moving towards a two compartment to the four compartment, the accuracy is improving. However, at the same time, the complexity of the procedure is also increasing. At the same time, the cost is also increasing. However, the four compartment model remains the gold standard and the criterion for the assessment of the body composition. Now, this is a figure which is just saying what is a typical body composition of a young healthy adult. Don't go by these percentages, because these percentages are basically for this population from which this figure is there. Just to give you an idea that the majority of it is the skeletal muscle mass. And then we have fat, which is then further divided into the storage fat and the essential fat. Then we have a bone and the other tissue. So this is basically the four compartment model. But this figure also highlights there's a difference between the gender. There's a gender difference in the body composition. At the same time, body composition changes with age, and there is a lot of difference in with various ethnic populations as well. So all these factors need to be kept in mind whenever we are assessing body composition. So why measure body composition? I think this slide has been presented many times in many presentations, but again, I want to emphasize upon it because this slide clearly highlights the fallacy of BMI. Here are two doctors, Dr. Yudkin and Dr. Yajnik, who have similar BMI, but however, if you look at the body fat, Dr. Yudkin has just 9.1% body fat, whereas Dr. Yajnik's 21.2% body fat. So which means that if we just rely upon BMI, we'll miss out on the real index of adiposity, and therefore the need for body composition study. Not only is the amount of fish fat which we want to know, but distribution of fat is also important. The total fat in the body can be divided into ectopic fat, the visceral fat, and the subcutaneous fat. Ectopic is where it should not be there, like intrahepatocellular, intramyocellular, cardiomyocellular, and pancreatic fat. Visceral fat is further divided into epicardial, intraperitoneal, and retroperitoneal. And intraperitoneal is further divided into the mesocolonic, lesser omental, greater omental, and the mesenteric fat. Now, there is clear data. There are various epidemiological studies, which have many studies now available with us, which have clearly correlated this visceral fat with the increased cardiovascular disease, increased risk of developing diabetes, blood pressure, and even the ectopic fat, as we all know, has been linked with the development of NAFLD, the intramyocellular fat leading on to the sarcopenia and the poor quality of muscles. Therefore, we need to understand this body composition as well, not just the overall BMI. And this slide again highlights the importance of understanding body composition, because there are the four obesity phenotypes which we are easily going to miss if we just rely upon the BMI, especially if you look at the middle ones here. the normal weight or normal BMI, where we are missing the increased visceral adiposity. And also this in the last one, the sarcopenic obese, in which we are missing out the low muscle mass if you're just relying upon the BMI. And these sarcopenic obesity, metabolically obese normal weight, normal base obesity, all these are associated, now been shown that associated with increased cardiovascular risk and metabolic syndrome. So broadly, these body composition assessment methods can be divided into the direct methods, that's a cadaver analysis, which is obviously cannot be done. It's in vitro analysis. Then there are indirect methods and doubly indirect methods. Now the indirect methods are the one which are based upon certain assumptions, and whatever we have available today are the indirect methods only. Doubly indirect are the ones in which one indirect measure, for example, DEXA scan, it's used to validate a generalized prediction of body composition from the another indirect measure. So example, skin folds. So we are using one indirect method to validate the another indirect. So that's our doubly indirect methods. Now, these are the body composition methods available in the clinical practice. There are many more. I have not listed it out because there are many more research methods as well. What is need to be understood here is that methods are evolving, and there is a difference in the ease of operator patients, the cost difference, the accuracy, the reproducibility difference is there. But we need to understand whenever we're choosing a method, what is the indication for that, what is the availability of that, which I'll come on to later. So I'll just going to highlight few of them which are available with us in the routine clinical practice. Well, just to go back also, the hydrostatic weighing is the one which was considered historically the gold standard for the measuring body percentage fat. This is also available, but not widely available now. It's just a simple two-compartment model where it differentiate between the fat mass and the fat-free mass. It calculates its body composition based upon this Archimedes principle, that is, fat is more buoyant than the lean tissue. So the difference of the body weight, which is outside the water and in the water, which gives the bone density. And from this the body's density. And from this body's density, we compute the body percentage fat using a population specific equation. So by using this equation, then the percentage body fat is derived. Limitations exist because we need to take care of the air in the lungs as well. We need to subtract that. It's a time consuming procedure, could be claustrophobic, not feasible to test large numbers. So overall, what idea it gives is the percentage body fat, not the distribution, and which is the fairly accurate. It gives the total amount of fat present in the body. The air displacement plethysmography is similar to hydrostatic weighing only. It's just that here the air displacement is noted, how much air is displaced using the computerized air pressure sensors. And then again, the body density is calculated. And from there to the equation, the percentage body fat. What is the device is used for this method? Again, this method is mostly used in the research purposes only. It gives the idea of the total percentage body fat, nothing else, no distribution, nothing. Coming on to the anthropometric measurements. Now, these are the measurements we all of us are using and are widely available. The two of them which are widely used are the waist circumference and the skin fold thickness. The waist circumference basically gives an idea of the abdominal obesity. And it has been, now there are many epidemiological studies which have linked this increased waist circumference with the increased cardiovascular risk, increased morbidity and mortality. So therefore, it is a fairly good indicator of the morbidity and mortality. And we have now Asia specific guidelines which have specific cutoffs for the Asian Indians as well. And here, as we can see here, that even if we combine it with the BMI, even with the normal BMI or the slightly increased BMI, if the waist circumference is normal, that is not much. As soon as the waist circumference is getting increased, the risk of cardiovascular disease is getting increased here. Now, how to measure waist circumference is very important in clinical practice. You need to find out the top part of the iliac crest, put the measuring tape there horizontally across the abdomen, put it snugly, but not putting an impression on the skin. And then you measure it at the end of the expiration. This technique becomes very important here. Waist hip ratio has also been used many times, but it has no added advantage over the waist circumference. The limitation of waist circumference is that it is not able to differentiate between the subcutaneous adipose tissue and the visceral adipose tissue. And the correlation of waist circumference with the CT measured visceral adipose tissue is just moderate. So that is the only limitation. However, it still continues to be used widely in the clinical practice. Skin fold thickness also measures the percentage body fat. The principle is that the amount of subcutaneous fat is proportional to the total amount of the body fat. And it is assumed that close to 1/3 of the total fat is actually located subcutaneously. Again, the exact proportion of subcutaneous to total fat will vary depending upon the sex, age, and race as well. So the equations which are used to convert the sum of these skin folds to percentage body fat should take into account these factors for a better accuracy. Again, multiple sites are used. Minimum 3 sites is required. More the sites, more are the accuracy. And there has to be many factors which should be taken into account to measure. It has to be really, one has to be expert in doing it. So technician training is very much required here, how to do the skin fold thickness measuring. So therefore, the accuracy depends a lot upon the technique, and it has fairly accurate, moderate accuracy in terms of calculating the total percentage body fat, which actually equates to the BIA. However, the errors, as I just said, there are so many technical issues involved. So there's poor technique, inexperienced evaluator, extremely obese or extremely lean subject, or improperly calibrated caliper can lead to a lot of errors. And therefore, this is again restricted mostly in the epidemiological research studies, not very much in the routine clinical practice. Coming on to the bioelectric impedance analysis, it again is based upon the two-compartment model that it divides it into fat mass and the fat-free mass. So what this does is it's small electrical current is introduced in the body, and the resistance of this electrical current is measured, which is impedance. The principle is that more is the water, more will be the less will be the resistance, and more with the fat, more will be the resistance. So the total body fat-free mass is calculated by this resistance. That means if the total body water we can calculate, it is assuming that 73% of the body's fat-free mass is water. So here is the catch. If you're assuming this, and then based upon this, you're calculating the fat-free mass, the change in the hydration status will affect a lot the accuracy of the measurement. So once you calculate the fat-free mass, you just subtract this from the body mass to give that overall fat mass. There are many BIAs available, single frequency, multi-frequency. Multi-frequency has advantage that it can differentiate between the total body water into extracellular and the intracellular water, which can actually take care of some part in the hydration errors. And then we have multi-segmental BIA, where it actually there are 4 electrodes both put on the wrist as well as on the feet, where can individually segmentally it can analyze the composition. There are again many precautions to be taken. It's not that a person is just coming in and you put the person make the person stand on the BI and calculate. No, many precautions to be taken. The person has to abstain from drinking or eating 4 hours prior, no exercise 12 hours prior, no alcohol 48 hours prior, no diuretics or caffeine before the test, because it affects the hydration status. This is how we get the report, where it gives obesity analysis, giving a total percentage body fat, as we can see here. It also gives an idea of the skeletal muscle mass. Now, this is again a predicted equation. The equation again is derived from a specific population. So we cannot use a population derived equation to any population. So that is where the error comes when we talk about the measuring skeletal muscle mass in the by the BIA. However, it does give the idea of skeletal muscle mass as well. And as I just talked about segmental lean analysis, it gives the measurement about the various segments individually in terms of their lean mass. Advantages of BIA, of course, it is portable. So that is the wonderful advantage, that you can use it in the field studies as well. Very low cost, quick and non-invasive, very simple and reproducible. So reproducibility is one good thing, that if you want to follow up a patient for a specific intervention, that can be done easily with the BIA. The reproducibility is good, safe for the repeated procedure. However, disadvantage is that it's an indirect method, limited by hydration status. This is very important. Hydration varies, is not reliable even in children, because in children this is not fixed at 73%, and you need a specific equation needed for each population. So that again makes a little bit problematic for the accuracy. And again, the various manufacturers are there, and the BIA devices from the various manufacturer will differ. So you measure body fat percentage from one BI machine, do it from the other one, it can differ a lot. So you need to follow up on the same machine. Coming on to the DEXA scan has advantage that it not only gives the whole body estimate, it gives a regional estimate as well. And it's a 3-compartment model. It gives an estimate of bone mineral, the bone-free, fat-free mass, and the fat mass. Now, it is providing more information than just body fat percentage. It gives gives you the skeletal muscle mass. It gives you the distribution of fat as well, bone density, bone mass. It has very good accuracy, excellent precision. And it is highly correlated, especially for the skeletal muscle mass. The DEXA scan has been highly correlated with the MRI mass in the adults. This is how you get the report of the DEXA scan, where you can see you will get a total body fat percentage. You will get the adipose indices also, like for example, fat mass by height square. You will get an android to gynoid ratio, which will give some kind of distribution. It also kind of estimates a visceral adiposity. This DEXA scan, by the equation, it can actually estimate, although may not be that accurate. It is not found to be that accurate to correlate with CT, but it just also gives the estimate of visceral adiposity. And in terms of the lean mass, if you see, it gives the appendicular lean mass. So each and every appendicular skeletal muscle mass you can calculate. And this is very helpful in defining the sarcopenia. And this is considered now the gold standard for the definition of sarcopenia. Here you can see in the final report, you can actually calculate and gives the appendicular lean mass by height square, which is required for definition of sarcopenia. Advantages is that, as I just discussed, it is able to differentiate fat, lean, and bone tissue. It's quick, very quick. It's non-invasive, very low radiation exposure, and measures the regional measures, and very well tolerated for repeated measures because of the low radiation and high precision and accuracy. Disadvantage, of course, it's not portable. So that's major disadvantage. You can't use it in the field studies. High cost, variability of instrument, calibration procedure is required. As I just listening to the free papers, that calibration is very important. Body thickness, even the hydration here also, it matters, because it is also assuming a certain hydration constant in calculating the body percentage fat, but is not that as much as in BIA. Of course, and there are inability to discriminate between the visceral and the subcutaneous also, and intramuscular also, all that is giving you some estimates here. Coming on to the CT and MRI. Now, CT or MRI are almost considered the gold standard in, if you talk about in terms of measuring adiposity, the distribution of fat, the skeletal muscle mass. This is an example of a CT scan where you can see it is a transverse image of an abdominal segment. Usually it is done at one segment only, L3, and then it is the whole body fat percentage is then equated by the certain equation. Here you can measure the skeletal muscle mass, you can see the visceral adipose tissue, you can see subcutaneous, and even the intramuscular. So it is giving you idea about ectopic, visceral, skeletal muscle mass, everything about it. Advantages, as I just discussed, is giving you distribution very nicely, high precision, very high accuracy. Disadvantage, the major of CT scan will always be a radiation exposure. Along with that, it's not portable, it has got high cost. MRI has similar advantage of CT, but no radiation exposure, but it takes longer time. And again, the issue of the not portability and high cost. This table just highlights what are the major components which are being assessed by the various techniques. As we have just seen, the total fat is every assessment method is calculating the total fat. However, when we talk about total lean tissue, again, the total lean tissue will be calculated, which will include your muscle, bone, and everything. When we talk about visceral adipose tissue, CTR and MRI are the best. DEXA scan gives some idea approximately. Volume of individual muscles cannot be found out by these, only by CT MRI. Diffuse fat infiltration only by CT and MRI. And yes, without ionizing radiation, we all know that only CT scan is here, which is problematic. Now, coming on to the norms, do we have some cutoffs here? Why are we doing it? If we do, what are the body percentage fat cutoff which we take? Unfortunately, there are no cutoffs universally accepted for body fat percentage. This is one of the table which was actually shown by an author way back in 2000, and it was published in an article. This is again not based off upon any study, but it just coincided with the NHN's data, which correlated with the higher body percentage fat with the comorbidities. And here, what they suggested in a young adult, not again the age between 20 to 40 years, this is the range which they had suggested, that men 8 to 25%, women to 20 to 35%. And this has been largely being used, but we still don't know what exactly the cutoff and what should we use. Norms of skeletal muscle mass are much better defined, where the European criteria we have with the use of DEXA scan, they have made the cutoff of ASM by height square, which is skeletal muscle index. And we have Asian criteria as well, and where we have DEXA scan, and both by BIA, they have given the cutoffs both for males and females. So the key messages are, there is no single measurement which allows the measurement of all the tissues and organs, and there is no method which is error-free. So that we have to keep in mind. Careful assessment of waist circumference, height, weight, and calculation of BMI should be done routinely. At least that is minimum we should be doing. In terms of precision and accuracy, DEXA, CT, and MRI are comparable for the whole body fat as well as the skeletal muscle mass. So this is good enough these three methods have very high precision and accuracy. MRI and CT, they gives access to accurate and direct measurement of diffuse infiltration of adipose tissue in the muscles and ectopic fat. So they are good for finding out the visceral and the ectopic fat. Deciding which method to be used depends upon the availability, the tissue of importance, and the indication of assessment. So if you want to diagnose a condition, use a method with a greater accuracy like DEXA, CT, and MRI. However, if you just want to follow up a patient for an improvement or anything, then you can use a BIA method as well. And adherence to the standardized pre-test condition is must, and repeat assessments is imperative to reduce the measurement errors. Thank you.